we like to start with a acknowledgement to the land. And although we're meeting virtually, I want to acknowledge that Baycrest itself operates on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations, which have cared for the land for thousands of years, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. And we recognize the current treaty holders as well, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The land that we're on remains home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum, which is an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And we are incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to work on that land today. And you might live and work in different territories, so we really encourage you to reflect on the land that you're located on and to consider your relationship to that land and to the people who are the traditional keepers of the land. We want to say now a few housekeeping rules. Please stay on mute unless you're speaking. Feel free to turn on your camera or keep it off, whatever's comfortable. We'd love to see you though, so the more they have it on, the more we feel like we're talking to real people. If you need closed captions, you can click on CC for auto-generated closed captions. If you don't see that, there might be a button that says more with 3 dots, and you can click on that, and you should be able to see a whole bunch of other options there. If you need to get up and take a break, grab some water, bio break, feel free, just take breaks as you need. Get up, stretch your legs. It's always good to stand if you listened to our exercise video episode. And for this one, we want you to use the chat function, which many of you are already using. It's great to see Jean from Winnipeg and others from down the road from me. I'm in Hamilton today. Others in Burlington I see. Here's someone from Surrey. So keep using that chat, not just to introduce yourselves, but also to say if you've got any questions or comments. And we'll come back to those a little bit later. The session is being recorded. Once we go to the part of the discussion where we're actually getting live questions from people, we're going to turn that recording part off so you can really feel free to ask more personal questions if that's something that's of interest to you. The next slide, you'll see we want to, when we come back to that open discussion at the end, we really invite you to come off your mic during the open discussion. If you're more comfortable just typing into the chat and having us read your comments that way, we're happy to do that. But whatever approach you're taking, let's just be sure that we keep our space respectful and supportive, and we need to make sure only one person is speaking at a time. And we want to thank, of course, the funders for this session, who include the Slate Family Foundation, Baycrest, and the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation. And now I would like to introduce the special guests. I am not a special guest, I'm one of the co-hosts, but I do want to introduce my other co-host, who is also today a special guest. He's serving 2 roles, and that is, of course, Jay Ingram. Jay has more than 40 years of experience as an author, a broadcaster, and a science communicator, including his work on the Daily Planet, CBC Radio's Quirks and Quarks, and working in the Toronto Star. He has now written over 20 books, and we're going to hear more about one of his books, the newest one, very shortly. And he's also the recipient of the Royal Society of Canada's McNeill Medal for the public awareness of science. He's been awarded a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, and he also was named to the Order of Canada, among many, many, many other honors. Welcome to Jay.
Well, hello, Allison, and hello to everybody who's joined us today. I think it's going to be a really interesting session. Allison really exaggerated a little bit. I am the co-host, but I'm not really here as a special guest. However, there is a coincidence going on here, which is that I recently published a book called The Science of Pets. And a small part of that book was about the role of pets not pets with dementia, but pets in supporting people living with dementia. And I think we're going to be talking a lot about that today. And I'll be interested to hear from our guests, as well as Allison, about their views on that subject. So I'm very happy to be here.
All right, great, thanks. Our next guest is, do you want to take the next one, Jay? we want me to keep going and introducing them all.
Sorry, I
I
was
can do.
sort of assuming
I'll do it.
you were doing so
Okay,
well.
I'll just keep going. I'll go on. So the next one is Dr. Theoni Patterson. And Dr. Patterson is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Victoria. And Theoni leads the Behavioral Research in Aging and Illness in Neuropsychology Lab, also known as the Brain Lab. And she's a registered psychologist with a practice in neuropsychology, and her research focuses on understanding how cognition and psychosocial functioning interact and how those factors help predict real world cognitive health outcomes as we age. So, welcome to Theoni.
Thanks very much.
All right, and last but not least is Dr. Lillian Hung. And Dr. Hung is an associate professor at the UBC School of Nursing and a clinician scientist at the Vancouver Coastal Health Research Institute. Her work centers on patient-oriented research and innovative care for people living with dementia and their caregivers. And through co-designed projects and collaborative approaches, she champions meaningful engagement and innovation to improve care experiences and support for people affected by dementia. And she is also an expert in robotics, which we're going to hear a little bit more in a bit. So welcome, Lillian.
Thank you so much, Allison. I am honored and very excited to be here. And I thought, Peril.
Yeah, you've got a little friend there. Introduce your friend, please.
Peril, it's a robotic pet and has been studied around the world for over a decade. So today we'll talk a little bit about this robotic pet.
Excellent. And I just, not to be outdone, I do also have a robotic friend with me, one of the little robotic dogs. But I'm keeping him off because otherwise he just barks at me all day. So
I just want to point out that Theoni and I are in Victoria, and the view that she apparently has behind her is just sort of typical, right? That's what most views in Victoria are like.
It's a background, but this is one of UVic's many beautiful backgrounds around Victoria. So it is real. It does exist here.
And I think we see a beautiful, is that a BC, Vancouver background behind you, Lillian?
Yes, it is. It's quite nice, except it's raining, which is typical Vancouver weather.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not going to bother showing the Toronto Hamilton background. This is just inside my house. But what we want to do before we get into a discussion with all of these amazing folks is to talk a little bit about, just give everyone a reminder about what is dementia, focus on what it is and what we know about it. Then we're going to dive a little bit more into pets and the discussion for today. So just as a reminder for folks, dementia is not one thing. Dementia is an umbrella term that is really describing a collection of different sorts of symptoms that are caused by different diseases that when they get to the point where they're affecting our ability to live our everyday lives, that is where it becomes called dementia. So dementia is a collection of different kinds of clinical symptoms. The one we think about most often is memory loss, but it also can include emotional changes, behavioral changes, planning changes, perceptual changes, sensory changes. So there's a bunch of different sorts of disorders, and they can affect the way that you live your everyday life. When it gets to that point that it's interfering, each of these diseases, whether it's Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia or Lewy body disease, these can be turned into dementia at some point when they start to have a bigger effect. Right now, about 50 million people around the world are living with dementia. The most common kind is Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is one of the kinds of dementia. So often we'll say Alzheimer's and make sure that you get it checked out. So as I was saying, Alzheimer's is the most common. It is very common, though, to have what we call a mixed pathology, which just means that we've got multiple versions of different kinds of diseases that are combining. So Alzheimer's plus, say, vascular dementia is a very common kind of a combination that you might see. Within aging, it is really important to remember that dementia is not a normal part of aging. In other words, what we mean by that is that just because people are getting older does not necessarily mean that they will end up being diagnosed with dementia. Dementia is a disease of the brain. and you can be diagnosed with it. Age is one of the biggest risk factors, but it is not considered to be just an expected part of aging. In Canada, right now, we have about almost 800,000 people estimated to be living with dementia across the country. And within the next 25 years, we're expecting that that number will more than double if we don't do anything different about the way we're approaching our lives. If you think about it globally, as I said, there were about 50 million people in 2020 living with dementia. And once every 3 seconds, on average, someone somewhere in the world is diagnosed with dementia. And what that means is that the numbers of people around the world, not just in Canada, but around the world, who are diagnosed with dementia are going to be also rapidly increasing. It's expected that that number could at least triple by 2050 globally, again, if we don't do anything to change the trajectory. One of the things, the big take-home message that we'd love for you to take home today, but also to share with people that you know, is that there are things that we can do to decrease that dementia risk. So I said, if we don't do anything, it's expected that we might see 3 times the numbers of cases of dementia by 2050. But there are things we can do, because not all of the cases of dementia are genetic. Genes play a role, but it's actually a relatively small role compared to most of the other factors. In the latest research that's been published in the Lancet report, at least 45% of the risk factors for dementia are related to things that we would call modifiable lifestyle risk factors. And they start early in life and go all the way through midlife and into later life. So in early life, the quality of your education turns out to be a predictor of dementia. If you have better education, stronger education, more education, you're more likely to avoid dementia in your later life. Early life, we would say, is from birth all the way up to age 45. It also turns out that doing continued lifelong learning can decrease your dementia risk. So just coming to this particular session and listening to the podcast and talking about it with your friends, that is a way that you're decreasing your dementia risk. In midlife, there are a number of different factors that have been shown without question to be risk factors for dementia. And so addressing those can also help to decrease our dementia risk. Hearing impairment, high LDL cholesterol, depression, traumatic brain injury, physical inactivity, excessive alcohol, obesity, high blood pressure, smoking, and diabetes. In your midlife, those are the factors that are most critical in driving your dementia risk. And even later in life, there are additional risk factors that are potentially going to be driving your dementia risk, including uncorrected visual impairment, social isolation and loneliness, and air pollution. And I should say, just because something says like air pollution, that it is a risk factor in later life, or quality of education is a risk factor in early life, we know that these risk factors are happening across the lifespan. It's just that if it's listed in early, mid, or later, it's when is the strongest relationship between one of these risk factors and dementia. So the idea here in these modifiable risk factors is that if we can change any one of these or multiple of them, we can actively take some control over our risk for dementia. So if I go and make sure that I'm getting my hearing checked, I'm getting my vision checked, I'm having those corrected so that I'm able to hear and see, I am actively decreasing my dementia risk. Same thing, taking care of your high blood pressure, drinking less or none at all if possible. All of those sorts of things are things we have some control over. And one of the things that's sort of interesting is that they are all kind of interconnected. A lot of them you might see are really related to the sorts of advice that you might hear if you were attending a session on reducing your stroke risk or your risk for a heart attack. The heart and the brain, the vascular systems are really interconnected. So if you're doing something that's going to be good for your heart, it's likely also going to be good for your brain and vice versa. It's also the case that things like social isolation and hearing impairment, maybe those are a little bit connected, because if you don't hear as well, then you won't be interacting with people in the same way, and then maybe you're going to become more isolated and lonely. And so you can see how these different kinds of risk factors all interact with each other, and they also interact with other topics that we've discussed on Defy Dementia that aren't on this list. And just because something's on this list does not mean it's not something to pay attention to. And the topic that we're going to talk about today, pets, is exactly one of those sorts of topics. It's not on this list, but we're going to explore a little bit today about what is the potential relationship between caring for a pet and your dementia risk. We want to start off with a poll, which is really just a simple question. Have you ever owned or cared for a pet? And you should be seeing a poll pop up in your window now if you're on the web link. And you can answer yes, that you currently do, yes, you did in the past, no, you never did, and you never will, or no, but you are considering it. So if people can answer in what their answer is, and then you click on the right button, and then you click submit, and we'll start to see how many people have current ownership of a pet, have previously owned or cared for a pet, never in a million years will ever even want to, or might be thinking about it. Okay, we're starting to see the answers coming in. Okay, and so what we'll see is quite a lot of people have either currently owned a pet or not. Only about 10% have never owned or cared for a pet, and at least a couple are thinking about it. And we'll see if that maybe changes by the end of this session. So I now want to turn it over to my co-host, Jay Ingram, who I think is also a special guest because he has just released his 21st book, which is called The Science of Pets. And that was really part of the impetus for us to be thinking about doing this whole episode. And when you listen to the episode, you get to hear Jay and Robbie, his dog, going for a walk, and hearing his own personal story, which is a big part of what we do on the Defy Dementia program. So Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about your book and also your own personal story about you and Robbie and pets.
Okay, thanks. That was a great intro, Allison. I have just one comment about one of the things you were talking about, which is, are things on the list that we can do something about, or are they not? And if they're not, does that mean they're not important? And I think as we've tracked this with Defy Dementia, the number of items of, habits that you can change or take on has risen.
Yeah.
And, I think sometimes people might be somewhat dismayed by that because thinking, how can I possibly keep up if there are now things that I should have been thinking about that are on the list that weren't on the list before?
Or things that are listed as early life. You can't go back in time.
Yeah. But, I think just paying attention to the ones that we have discussed that are on the list, or even if they're adjacent to the list, I think the most important thing is getting used to contemplating, to thinking about these things all the time, because I'm sure, quite certain that in the next 5 or more years, there'll be changes in that list. I think some items, as their impact on dementia seems to be declining, might actually fall off the list.
Yes. Yeah.
Others will definitely be added. And I think just being aware there's a list and there are things you can do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that many of them will be constant. So,
yeah, just before you go on, I just want to highlight, like smoking, for example. When we first started the podcast, smoking was listed with a higher risk than it is now, because as awareness has grown about the dangers of smoking, people have stopped. And so it's become less of a global risk. And then uncorrected vision and high LDL cholesterol got added now 2 years ago in 2024 to the latest iteration of the list. Things that we know are really important, like sleep, those are not on the list yet, but they almost certainly will be. So yeah, we say 45% now. It's probably going to get to be at least 50, 60% are things we've got some control over.
Yeah, which is, let's say over the last 20 years, a pretty incredible statement to make.
Yeah.
You mentioned genetics. And, my mother had Alzheimer's disease. And so 20 years ago, I thought a lot about did I inherit one gene that might predispose me, or even two? But then, as it became clear to us as we continued doing new episodes, the actual impact of bad genes um, is overcome by lifestyle changes. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I actually don't worry about it anymore. And just one more comment before I talk a bit about pets, and that is that LDL cholesterol, as you said, is a recent addition. And I saw an article last week suggesting that another cardiac marker, vascular marker, might actually be more important. And so it's a shifting sort of
Yes.
situation. But I think, first of all, that's what science is all about. And secondly, it's great that so much attention is being paid to these
Yeah,
factors that can reduce all of us here today, reduce our risk for dementia.
absolutely.
So we're going to be talking, and we have two experts here that will talk quite a bit more about pets and dementia than I will. Um, I, my dog Robbie, and I won't go on and on about him, but he is both delightful and irritating. And I think this is actually a good thing because I think it represents a kind of span of behaviors, a range of behaviors that any pet probably has. And I think that's one of the quite delightful things about them. Even when you're irritated that he is barking his head off because somebody went into a house next door, um, that's his job. He's territorial. He's making sure I'm okay. And pets generally, and maybe I'll draw a couple of lines here about the kind of pets that probably might be more relevant to dementia than others. I won't go into detail here, but obviously dogs and cats are the pets we're most familiar with in North America, and frankly, they're prevalent worldwide. Um, that isn't to say there are many, many other species of pet. And in fact, if you look worldwide as much as possible, you'll discover that it doesn't matter which part of the world you're talking about, which sort of geography, what kind of weather, what kind of climate, there will be pets. And most often there'll be pets taken from the local fauna. And so there are lots of places where there aren't that many dogs or cats, but there might be monkeys, there might be weasels. I even cited a case in my book of in Polynesia where, at least in the 1800s, some kings kept eels in
Wow.
pools
Yeah.
scattered around an island. So it's important to remember that. And it's important to think about how much of a social relationship can you have with a pet? Because I wouldn't make the argument when we eventually talk about pets and dementia that all pets would contribute to a reduction of the likelihood of dementia. Because I think, and maybe our experts will agree or disagree, but I think the degree of companionship and actual personal feelings will play a large role. And you can have many more kinds of relationships and activities with dogs and cats than you probably can with eels. And so it's important to remember that. But there is something, I think, innate about the desire to have pets. And, we're the only species in the world that keeps pets, and there must be a reason for that. And it goes back probably 30,000 or more years, at least with dogs, and probably 10,000 years at least with cats. That's the very first two animals really to be domesticated. That's that's a powerfully long relationship that you can only imagine has impacts on us mentally that we might not have ever realized. So, I found researching pets and writing about pets to be quite a lot of fun. I learned that You can't think about a pet without thinking about the human that's associated with the pet because you get most of your information about the pet from the human, and humans are demonstrably inaccurate in describing what their pet thinks and doesn't think, does and doesn't do. So I'll leave it at that. I'll probably hopefully have something more to say once we get into
Yeah.
the discussion.
Just a question in the work that you were doing in researching the book just in your own experience, like pets obviously is not on the Lancet list of the risk factors that we mentioned before. But here on the slide that's being shown here, it says pets often help reduce stress and anxiety, loneliness, depression. What are, from your perspective, what are the sorts of things that you think are key? How do pets intersect with that list?
Oh, I think if you take high blood pressure as an example, there's been a lot of documentation showing that dog owners in particular, and not cat owners, unfortunately, but dog owners um, tend to have lower blood pressure than non-dog owners. Um, this is actually one of the few areas, I think, where the information is really solid and definitive. And when you think about it, Allison, you know, I mean, even stopping short of dementia, just doing a survey to try and establish that people with pets are healthier, it's very, very difficult because every individual is different, every pet is different, every situation involving the two is different, and trying to, create a nice control group versus the experimental group is really, really hard. But um, I would say that blood pressure and, so the activity generally would
Right.
be one thing. I think social life to a certain extent. Cat owners love to talk up to other cat owners about cats. Dog owners love to meet people on the street who are walking their own dogs. And even if that's relatively, trivial 30-second conversation, it's still better than not talking to anybody at all. So I think that's crucial. And, I'll just throw this out here, but because it's not well established yet, but there is evidence um, that especially young children who play with pets actually change their microbiome, the set of bacteria in their intestines
Not because they're
actually,
eating the pets.
no, but, kissing the pet would do it. And there's even some evidence, and I would categorize this as very preliminary, that the kind of microbiome changes that you might have as a result of having a pet, especially if you're an adolescent, are actually good ones. They actually have some sort of effect on mood. Anyway, I suspect that's straying a little bit off the scientific, but I think as we'll talk, we'll probably
Yeah.
encounter other reasons or other ways that, if a dog lives to 14 and he or she has been with you all that time, or a cat lives to 18 and has been with you all of that time, there is a powerful emotional connection, and it has to affect the brain. And I'm presuming that it would affect the brain in a positive way.
Yeah. So let's bring in Theoni into the conversation, and she can tell us a little bit more about maybe what is going on in the brain and what are the cognitive benefits of pets and how does it slow decline?
Okay, yeah. So I'll just kind of jump right in and tell you about a few studies that have been done recently and kind of what they're showing. I want to start though by saying that this is very much still a developing area of research. So there haven't been any of those huge, randomized controlled trials or systematic reviews with hundreds of papers or that kind of thing. These are mostly individual studies that I'll talk about. Um, but in a study using data from the Alabama Brain Study on Risk for Dementia, researchers looked at measures of cognition as well as brain structure and function for both older and younger adults. And after actually accounting for age and education and some other factors, they found that pet owners had higher scores on measures of attention and processing speed, as well as verbal memory. They found effects for multiple different pet types, because I know we've talked about lots of different pet types. I don't know if they looked at eels, but um, they did find that dog ownership appeared to have a stronger effect on cognitive function. But even for others, any pet ownership generally was associated with some impact on positive impact on cognitive function, and with also on increased volume in brain areas related to attention specifically, which is interesting. Um, Another recent study, which had about 8,000 older adults in it from the English Longitudinal Study on Aging, looked at this group of adults for an 8-year period, and researchers showed that older adults who live alone, if they have a pet, that was associated with a slower rate of cognitive decline, specifically verbal functions, so things like verbal memory or your fluency with how you speak, the words you're able to utter and call up when you need them. And in that study, they didn't see the same positive impact for pet ownership when people lived with other people. But if they didn't live with other people, then having a pet had that impact. So that indicates that pets probably maybe at least have more noticeable impact for people who are living alone, older adults living alone.
I guess we
In a,
shouldn't use the word substitute there, should we?
I don't know,
Pets are
the
people
research
too.
may there yet. And then a third study used data from 8 different waves of the Survey of Health and Retirement in Europe. And those researchers examined the relationship between pet ownership and cognitive decline over an 18-year period for adults who were 50 or older at the beginning of the study. And the results confirmed that pet ownership was associated with slower declines in both executive function and episodic memory. And that study also looked at whether the type of pet, dog, cat, birds, were the ones they looked at, had an impact. And it showed that dog and cat ownership were associated with these differences specifically.
And was that
So
true
birds and
also
fish.
if they were living with other people or not, or just for the folks
This
living
was
alone?
this one didn't look at living situations, so they were seeing an effect either way. And I mean, the caveat with these studies is they're using data that's already been collected for these
Right,
longitudinal studies. So
right,
the types of cognitive measures are
right,
variable across all
right.
of these, and they're just
Yeah,
using the data that they have, basically.
yeah.
So are we on? Oh, we're good. We're on the next slide
One
already.
one thing,
Perfect.
just as an aside, really quickly, when you're mentioning these studies, 8 years long, 18 years long, it really highlights how important it is to have that longitudinal data. Uh,
Yes, and that's one of the, wonderful things about the current climate of research is that all of these longitudinal data sets are now coming to fruition, right? They all have 8 or 18 or 20 years, and so it's great that now we can start looking at all of that data, which is
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
Pets also have been shown to have some recent or some beneficial impact for those who are already diagnosed with or experiencing some cognitive decline or dementia. A recent longitudinal study in Japan had over 11,000 older adults who had been diagnosed with mild dementia and were living in the community in their own homes. And in that study, dog ownership was found to decrease the likelihood of experiencing disabling symptoms of dementia over a 4-year follow-up period. And they additionally looked specifically at physical activity and social isolation related to dog ownership in that study and found positive impacts of both decreases in social isolation as well as kind of having a standard activity schedule with your dog and that kind of thing. Another study in Finland looked at 220 older adults with mild Alzheimer's disease who were also living at home in the community. And over a 5-year period, the pet owners in that study had significantly better daily activities, daily activity functions, and abilities to do those activities independently, and a slower
And
disease
Theoni, sorry, can you
progression.
describe like what is daily, what counts as
Yeah,
a
so
daily
that could
activity?
be any types of things. It could be, being able to use the telephone by themselves, being able to cook a meal. It could even include more basic things like being able to, toilet yourself
Right.
or, take a shower independently, that kind of thing. And then one other recent study looked at people, again, with this time mild to moderate dementia who were living at home and asked if they had pets, and if so, the extent of their involvement in caring for the pet specifically.
Mm.
And those researchers found that for people living with dementia who had pets, it was the act of caring for the pet that appeared to both serve as a main factor in decreasing depression and also in improving quality of life. So that's kind of just a snapshot of the pet research to date for cognition.
So, Theone, I'm going to ask you for an impression, not a scientific opinion on this, but given the variety of studies that you've just mentioned, they all hint that there could be an impact on either the development of dementia or the progression of it. Is that your sense that because, as you said, there haven't been long studies or detailed reviews, that might be the direction we're heading, even though we're not there yet?
Yeah, I think, and I mean, I think to some extent this is, easier or more difficult depending on the situation, but I think some of the studies have called for, large scale randomized controlled trials, which in like medical research is kind of the gold standard of figuring out whether something is useful or not. It's hard to do that with pet ownership though, because
Yeah.
people are out in the community just either having or not having their pets. So
Yeah.
someone will have to come up with an interesting study design in order to figure that out. Maybe some sort of a foster adoption of pets or something like that for a 6 month period. I don't know. Something will have to happen in that respect. But right now, and I mean, I think more and more of those big longitudinal data sets will also probably be used for this. I'm involved with the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging, and I'm assuming we have a pet question. We must. We have thousands
If
of
not, we got to
questions.
get one added.
Right, exactly. So, but that data, I mean, we have data for about 50,000 older Canadian adults. And so if we can ask 50,000 adults about their pets, we'll probably get some interesting information back.
Yeah. Um, eh, there's so many potential benefits. Yes, more research must be done, but there's so many potential benefits. The question comes up: what happens for people who would like to have a pet but can't for various reasons? And this is where Lillian, I think you can come in and talk to us a little bit about what happens if someone has a robotic pet instead of a fur and flesh and blood pet.
Yeah, our robotic pet can be furry as well, and the fur can be very comforting. And I am an animal person, and I have a real dog and a cat in my house. But I also have several robotic pets, and my study look at how these robotic pet can support people with dementia. And the study I have done with was the one that I should have shown you guys. This one, this is Peril. It's a robot that has been studied around the world. And there's some country, like in Scandinavian countries, Denmark, in nursing home, 80% of those nursing home will have this robotic pet. And in BC, that we are having some care home also using this robotic for recreation programs, and we use it in acute care for a variety of things as well. So people often said that, ask me the questions about like the real animal offers so many benefits. Like, why do we even think of using a robotic pet? The robotic pet is not a real animal. And what might be some of the uh, problematics of using a real animal or a robotic pet? So maybe I will talk a little bit about that. Like as Allison hinted, some people that with disability, people with dementia, they might have mobility, and it makes it challenging to look after a pet because that's a reciprocal relationship. The real animal, you need to take the dog for walks. You have to feed the dog, right? Or
Yeah.
sometimes with memory implications, people may over. We had a dementia village here in BC that we have animals being overfed because it's fun to feed animals, right? So we have to think about the well-being of the animals as well and the ethical risk of the animals as well. So a robotic pet could come in and offer the same consistent, non-demanding type of companionship. So it will offer similar type of benefits because we know, like I love the picture that Jade shows, that when you pet a cat, it can be very calming. It offers a lot of comfort, but
Yes.
especially in people they are experiencing anxiety, stress, and social isolations, right? And another thing with the robotic pet, it's the robotic pet's a program to provide that unconditional positive response. So you don't have to worry about, that the person may feel rejected if the the animal walk away or a certain behavior that the person might interpret it in differently. So it offers that unconditional, consistent type of response. So I think that there are in certain contexts, especially for people with dementia that maybe in the later stage and when caring for a real animal becomes too challenging or impossible, then the robotic pet can come in and play a role to reduce, like what the slides talk about, help people to reduce anxiety, stress, agitations. It can help with depressions and loneliness as well, especially in a care setting. Can sometimes I think
Yeah.
about like in institutions, real animals not always allowed, and if it requires care, then it requires staff time to care for that animals, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we saw that during the pandemic at Baycrest, we often, like many places, had pet visits where people would bring, real live cats and dogs onto our campus, and they would go into our long-term care home. But during pandemic, that wasn't allowed. And so we made sure that folks living in Baycrest had access to virtual pets, the cats and dogs from the Joy for All group, and it was amazing. And so they're still using the virtual pets, sorry, the I guess robotic pets as well. And it was just so much easier for the staff, but also for the folks living, because they had access all the time, not just
Yeah.
when every couple of weeks someone comes to visit, right?
The access all the time, it's an important thing. Like if someone who is like, had a bad dream night, having a nightmare, or certain like in a situation that they needed an animal to help. I could tell you this story that I was in VGH and I live in Vancouver, so I worked in Vancouver General Hospital. There was one time that we had a patient came in and emerged that had a cardiac conditions, that he was having pain and a lot of discomfort. But with the pain and the environment, he probably had a delirium that he was not allowing anyone go near to him to do any kind of blood work diagnostic, right? So he just kind of kicking people out, like, don't touch me. And so I happened to be there that I was able to bring Peril, the robotic seal. He started to pet the Peril.
Oh.
And then, that we have the mobile lab came over and that we were able to do the diagnostic. So it's like it's just amazing to how sometimes, a pet, even it's a robotic one, could offer that, that magic to calm someone down. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. We're
It,
gonna. Oh, sorry, Jay. Jay, go on.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, Lillian, I've seen arguments that object to robotic pets, in that maybe it's unethical because you're fooling the patient into thinking it's a real pet, and but I take the same attitude, and I'd like to know your response to this. But I take the same attitude as I do to do you always correct a person living with dementia? And I just think, no, your goal as a companion to someone living with dementia is to ensure that if you've gone to visit them, when you leave, they're happier than when you arrived. And
Mhm.
I just think that's a simple principle that would be very hard to argue against from an ethical point of view. But do you ever encounter that
Mhm.
sort of point of view that, this is fake and we're fooling the person?
Yeah, in fact, that I published a paper on the ethics about using social robots, and in the paper that we wrote about this story about this mom that had the robotic cat, kind of like what you saw in the picture there, and she loves it, but the son was really against it and didn't want the mom to have it because he felt it was like making mom infantilize mom. And so so he went against it. So we talk a little bit about like who should have the right to say that, the person should be using this robotic pet. And from all the people that I work with, like people with different level, different types of dementia using robotic pet, people are they're in moments of knowing that I think most I remember this person. She flipped the Peril and she looked at the batteries. He said it's not dead yet. Like apparently, like she know this is a robotic pet, right? So we never told the person that this is a real animal. We always when we introduce the robotic pet, we have a protocol. How do we introduce it? And we always say, introduce that this is a robot. But like people choose to interact with the robotic pet in the way that a lot of time that they choose to talk to them like a human. But cat, even when you talk to cat, you use a human language. You talk to the cat like your family members, right? So do we know that the cat is not a human? Like you can apply to that as well, right? So it's up to that person. Yes, you're right to, how they want to interact with the cat. And then as human, we have that tendency to project our own emotion into the animal. And same that with robotic pet, we project our emotion into the robotic pet. We use our language and not only like in the conversation, a two-way conversation, we talk about outside as a human, but we also speak for the cat as well, and including the robotic cat.
Yeah.
And there are striking examples, especially in the military, of a group of soldiers working with say, a mine detecting robot. And as it continues to, meander around and gets a leg blown off and another leg, the soldiers get emotionally upset.
Yes. Yes.
And at the end of this excursion, they'll run out and grab what's left of the robot and bring it back. I mean, there's more than one account of that. And that just says to me that, it's not just people living with dementia that we're talking about, it's people, period. And as humanoid robots get more and more, you know, skilled and convincing, I think you're going to see a revelation that humans respond to robots on an emotional level generally. So
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
You're right. I think it's in our DNA, it's our nature as a human beings that we need not only to receive love, we also had that deep need to give love. So with either it's a robot pet or a real pet, we need that emotional connections. And
Yeah.
having a pet animal or a robotic pet, it's a means for us to have the connections. Yeah.
Yeah. And my favorite book about pets is, of course, Jay's new book about pets, The Science of Pets. My
Me too.
second favorite book about pets is called The New Breed. Reveals about our future with robots. And if people don't know that book, she takes us through the history of animals and how animals were domesticated and people's relationships and the similarities of how things will be going with robots. It's really interesting. And she does work at MIT in exactly that space that you're talking about, Jay, where she brings
Yeah.
people in and they're not at all connected to these, and they don't look like animals or a mine detecting robot is not going to look like a seal with big eyes or a dog, but you can still form these connections. It's really quite interesting. We want to actually, speaking of data, because Theoni said we need more data, we want to collect some data from everyone who's here today. So we're going to be doing another poll. And this is especially for people who have had pets, which was the vast majority of you. What are your views? And you can answer more than one of these sorts of things. When you've had a pet, did having that pet encourage you to be more active? Did it encourage you to go outside? Did it provide comfort and emotional support? Did it reduce feelings of loneliness or isolation? Create a routine or sense of purpose? Did it strengthen social connections, or did it have no noticeable impact? So we'd ask that you sort of click all of those. And I'm clicking mine, and then I'm going to click submit. So just click submit as you're finishing. And then what we're going to be doing is moving into the time in this session where we're going to be taking questions from all of you in the audience as well. So be sure that you are putting your questions into the chat, and then we'll be calling on people to be able to answer those. And you can see the vast majority of people who have had pets in the past have had significant impact. So this is maybe not something we can publish in Nature or Science. It's not that scientific, but certainly gives us a sense that the kind of things we're talking about. I'm really struck by the comfort and emotional support. 92% there. Folks, what strikes you about the results of this poll? Is it surprising to you? Theone or Lillian or
Not
David?
to me. Um, I mean, as you said, the comfort and emotional support is pretty striking. And a couple of the things that I mentioned earlier, getting you outside, being more active, creating routine, I find that very central to a dog's life, at least my dog's life. He he creates routines for me. So but those are really secondary to the reducing loneliness and isolation and getting emotional support. That's pretty striking.
I find it interesting that people said that encourage you to be more active. I think people may be thinking a sense of physically active, but in my study that I have learned from my participants that these are people with different level of dementia. In fact, many of them are very old and have more of a moderate to the later stage of dementia, that they have like language impairment. I find that to be able to have a robotic pet to interact with, it helps their cognitive health, their brain health, because they will use their creativity to talk and like it's important that it doesn't have to be perfect sentence, but when they start using it, even though they have impairment, that will help to maintain the language and to use the brain for creativity. I think that offers a lot of benefits as well. So that goes beyond physical active. I think that's intellectually or cognitive active and socially active because whenever you bring a pet, either a real animal pet or a robotic pet, people will come over and they will have
Yeah.
start there like
Yeah, so
it
like,
brings
oh,
people
and so they
together.
start the conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there was a comment in the chat from Robin Smart who was saying, well, maybe one reason that there's more uh, of a response for the emotional support and reducing loneliness than maybe getting outside and activeness, maybe the cat dog people divide. Because Theone, you were talking about, and Jay, you were talking about some of the research suggesting that there's more of some kind of impacts on dogs. I mean, you don't necessarily have to take a cat for a walk, at least not with the cats I've had. Does that resonate with you? Is that where maybe some
Well,
of the difference between the animals comes in?
I think the physical activity piece probably comes in more with dogs, although I will say one of our cats asks to go on walks and he will put his harness on and he will go outside. He doesn't walk as far though. So in terms of like, heart rate variability
Yeah.
and blood pressure and that kind of stuff, he's probably not helping, but everybody on the street is like, "Oh, he's so cute. What is he? What kind of cat is he?" So the socialization
yeah.
part of it is there for sure.
The social part is also, and it relates to this in a way, that if you are walking your pet, your cat, Theone, or my dog, or whatever, probably like if you're in an outdoor shopping mall, so there are lots of people, two or three out of 10 will actually stop and and talk to you about your dog or pet, and interestingly ask what's your dog's name. And I sort of think, what, you don't really have to know that. You can just pet them if you want to. But there are those people that have this really strong desire to interact with a pet. And I just keep going back to that idea I mentioned at the beginning that we're the only pet keeping species in the world. And that just says there is something underlying all these positive links that we see, emotional support, reducing loneliness, activity, everything. There's just something about having another animal in your vicinity that impacts you. And, you know, uh, it's been called biophilia, just some sort of innate human DNA thing that attracts us to other living things. And I think a robotic pet falls into that category.
Yeah. We're getting a lot of good questions in from the audience. We want to turn to that next and co-host this. Jay and I co-host this podcast. Once a month, we release something new. And it is a public awareness initiative, really, that's supported now by the Slate Family Foundation, the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, and Baycrest. And our real goal is to help people decrease their dementia risk and make them aware of the kind of things we're talking about today, what you can do to take some control in your life, to either reduce your dementia risk or slow the progression of the disease. How do you help people living with dementia? I think we think it's important regardless of your age, right? Because you're never too young or too old to take care of your brain, right?
That's right.
That's right.
And, as we continue to issue new episodes, we'll be introducing new ideas. We try to track the research as closely as we can so that the kind of information we're passing on to everyone who listens is completely up to date. And as Allison and I chatted quite a bit earlier now in this, um, we said some of the habits or lifestyle hacks that uh, might be prominent in the list right now will decline as some of their beneficial effects take hold. Others will be discovered. And it's not to neglect the idea that obviously, from a medical point of view, a treatment for Alzheimer's and other dementias is important. But in the interim, before treatments really come solidly online, it just makes sense to take steps to reduce your risk. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, we want to avoid that situation where we end up with triple the number going forward by 2050. One of the things that was really important to us when we started the Defy Dementia project back in 2023 now, gee, I can't believe
Yeah.
it's been that long, was realizing that different people learn in different ways. So yes, we have the podcast. In the earlier days, we also had a number of videos and infographics because some people would like just a 1 minute bite of something, and some would like to read about something, some would like to hear about it. We are coming back to being able to record some more videos because people have requested some of those, and so we'll be bringing those back. Just to give you an example of one, we have one here from episode 3, which was our cognitive engagement episode with Nicole Anderson and Rebecca Chop. I think we're going to play that for people here.
Learning something new is fun and rewarding. And guess what? It can also help decrease your dementia risk.
Research shows that engaging your brain keeps it healthy. It's called cognitive engagement, and it's any activity that's mentally stimulating.
It could be something like music lessons, learning languages, or even joining a book club. It just needs to bring you joy and give you a sense of purpose.
And this applies to everyone with a brain, whether you have a diagnosis of dementia or not, and no matter how young or how old you are, as long as you're challenged, thinking, and learning, you're pumping up your brain.
Thinking boosts blood flow, creates new brain cells, and builds better connections.
But, like exercising, repeating something that you've gotten good at over and over won't cut it. You've got to keep challenging yourself.
And it's even better when you mix things up, doing a range of different activities, so that cognitive engagement is a whole brain workout that can decrease your dementia risk.
So those are just like short 1 minute little bites that summarize the discussions that we've had with folks. And Jay, do you want to discuss what the infographics are?
Yes, so we're looking at a couple of infographics right now, and they are, in a sense, like the little videos, but more written information, and just a way of packaging, capsulizing the information that we've dealt with in the podcast that is accompanied by these infographics. And again, this kind of learning, this kind of information uptake is preferred by lots of people. And so what we're trying to do with the podcast, with infographics, with videos, and even with this event today, we're trying to present information that would be useful for people to take on board. And we're trying to do it in as many ways as possible to capture the largest audience possible. Because, obviously, if you can reduce your own risk of dementia, that's really important for you and your loved ones. But the healthcare system, uh, if many people do this, and many people at least delay or even prevent getting dementia, the impact on the healthcare system will be enormous because, as you
Huge.
said earlier, Allison, um, we don't want to be doubling or tripling numbers.
Absolutely. And we have a bunch of other resources. One of the things that we do, if you go to the Defy Dementia website, I think you can see here, it's just defydementia.org. And you can get all of these, the podcasts, the infographics, the videos, and we'll be adding, as I said, more in coming up soon. You can also get a lot of resources. And among the resources that we like to share with people, other ones that have come specifically out of Baycrest that are also supported by the Slate Family Foundation, our Cognicity Brain Health Assessment, which helps you sort of get a sense of how healthy is your brain, an online hearing screen, so you can just, in the privacy of your own home, test your hearing, CCART, which is a caregiving tool for resources for caregivers, and a game that we've created with some really clever folks in Ottawa who created the Canadian version of Sudoku and the Canadian version of Wordle called Knuckle. And this is our Brain Health Kanoku game. You can access all of those through the website, and we're going to put the links to all of those in the chat for you here as well. And so we can make sure that you can see them here in the chat. Go to defydementia.org to find everything. And I just want to end by saying thank you. Thank you, Theoni and Lillian, for sharing your knowledge with us here today, but also on our podcast. And thanks to the whole Defy Dementia team, including, of course, my co-host and special guest today, Jay Ingram. And especially thanks to Rosanna Aliang, Sylvain Debroca, Katerina Nemethy, Nagar, Mazloum Farzaghi, Suzanne Pede, and Anosha Tariq, who are here with us today coordinating this Defy Dementia event. And the next virtual event will be taking place on February 26th. Most importantly, though, I want to say thank you to all of you for coming with us and sharing your thoughts. And we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.